How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another video on the intermediate React version 5. In today's video we're going to recap about how you can migrate JavaScript code in React to Typescript. So what are the pain points, as well as what are the suggestions made by Brian Holt, a software engineer that has previously worked at Microsoft, Reddit, Netflix, Snowflake, and now he's currently the VP of product at SQLite Cloud. So the goal of this course is just that allows to us or developers learn how to write production ready React applications. So here we're going to look at tools and techniques that allow us to do that in a way that not only help us to write these production ready React applications, but solve business problems, provide business value to the company or to your clients. That's the entire reason of doing all of this. So these tools and techniques we have is server-side rendering, code splitting in the case of techniques, as well as testing and transitions, and tools like Typescript, Tailwind, and Redux. So far we look at the course here is organized something like this. So you got hooks in depth, tailwinds, advanced React performance, the code splitting and server-side rendering, low priority re-rendering, Typescript, Redux, and testing. So far we have looked at all of this, okay, as well as the core features on React, which is also a course taught by Brian Holt. And here I already make my notes about it. Okay, so for example, like this. Okay, and here we didn't organize the code, but this is the previous or the Jesus, the course that comes after what we're gonna look right now. Okay, where here we look at the core React features such as GSX. So what is React is all about? What is the value proposition of React? GSX, which is part of these core features, the GSS hooks, custom hooks, use effects, as well as how you can list or rendering list elements, how you can work with forms, uncontrolled forms, and control forms, and also look at how you can make these React component compositions, some guidelines, especially when you're going to write your applications, and then the React DevTools, as well as things that you need to know before setting up your project, such as the ESLint, okay, this code linting, which help us on how we can give style to our code. The code linting, the formatting come from Prettier, as well as Typescript, which is help you to ensure the correctness of your code with testing, which is actually part of the features, or in this case tools, from this advanced course, Typescript and testing. Okay, remember that the whole idea of today's video or from this course is to help us to write this production ready React apps. And this is just as a way to recap about all of these core concepts, as well as the React capabilities, such as React hook. So you have this React router, React query, React form or React hook forms, as well as how you can start to work with class components. What is the sort of difference between the class and the functional components? Where you can use this, as well as advanced cases or special cases like error boundaries, when you want to detect errors in one of your components, what you want to do, how you want to handle that. The other is models or portals, how you're going to handle elements that are not in the normal render tree, that are outside of that, and how you can now show them, how you can show those elements using portal, as well as context. This is where you want to hold, you want to store your data, okay? That can be usable across several other components. The idea of this state management, or this way of how you can store this data, as long as your applications doesn't need to handle too much state, all right, you might use context. The problem with that context is that it doesn't give you it gives you this undeterministic behavior. Luckily for us, there are now built-in features, for example here on hooks in depth, such as use reducer, that now is bringing the particularity pattern called Redux as a way to, from the developer's perspective, make it much more easy when it comes to detect change on the UI. So that's interesting, that's powerful, because with that, now we can enter here on the hooks in depth as a way to make a quick recap of where are the most common hooks that Facebook actually use for handling their specific business use cases. If you're building perhaps a web app for an e-commerce or any other applications, might not be the case for you. But again, it is important to understand that this is something that they use to help them to cover their use cases. So we went through useRef as a way to get an element from the DOM, and then you let it on using it, or a computation. So you have the useRef. We also look at the use reducer, something that we previously mentioned. This is just a fancy name to say I got an state that I'm going to based on an action. I got an state and an action. I'm going to generate a new bit of state out of it. Okay. And this is where we now can introduce is a deterministic behavior or a time travel debugging. Something that you're going to, by Brian Hall actually mentioned, is like, you're definitely gonna need that, my friend. You are definitely, it'll make your life much more easy when it comes to debug all of this particular data pipeline. So, or in this case, how the UI state from one state, or how our UIs change from one state to another, and so on and so on. Okay, so the other thing here, okay, is that so the other thing is this. We also look at other hooks in advance, such as use layout and such as use layout and use ID. Okay, use layout is when you need to render something right after the the, the React render the component, or wait for the next tick, wait for the component to render on the browser, okay? Not right after the render function was invoked. The idea here is to reduce re-rendering, pretty much. Is to keep one is to minimize the rendering uh, based on a user interaction. And then I also look at something called use callback and use memo. This is for optimizations techniques when you want to catch the result of a calculation. So for example, memoize a function, or you want to avoid re-rendering components. Remember that after all, these are just tools that are useful for Facebook. Might be your case. If you're having this kind of problem, please send me a check for that. I'll gladly to help and assist. Then we look at tailwinds. The TLDR is that it allows us to write a tiny little CSS class that the Tailwind compiler will going to take and generate a minimized CSS code. Why do we want to do that? Well, because maintaining large CSS code bases can be problematic. So Tailwinds now offer us is a way of how we can now adding all of these little tiny CSS classes for us. And in the meantime, we look at what is the anatomy of the Tailwind. So you have the compiler, you have the transpiler from CSS called PostCSS, as well as the how do you put it? As well as the outer prefixers that help us to generate is the necessary code for CSS code for specific browsers. I also look at how we can start to use that, and then how can we now extend the Tailwind functionality. Not only that, but to describe and to use the layout. How can we define different layouts here on Tailwinds? So for example, like on small screens or tablet, desktop, how it's going to look like, and it also helps us to work with grid template, which is awesome, great. Okay. And then the advanced React performance techniques, which is code splitting and server-side rendering. Code splitting focus on this. Find a way to sorry. So code splitting is all about loading the bare minimum necessary code, so we teach our app about how to set up and everything while showing something to the user, and then loading everything in the background. How is this done? Well, React offers us a component called lazy, or a function called lazy, where we can choose which one of these React components we're going to render that. So that's great, that's cool. And the other is, well, by doing that, how React know that these components need to be loaded later, and where React component is storing those things. And another interesting question is that how do we know which sorry, how much code do we load, or how much will be our, or how, what will be our threshold when we hit, what will be our initial code budget here, what will be our initial threshold here? Well, this is something that a lot of company must define, must dedicate, right? So with by that, what with that, what I mean is that you're going to have some sort of threshold that you want to stay under, or a performance timing that you want to hit when it comes to use code splitting. So for example, you have is 100 millisecond, you want to load is 100 kilobytes, 500 kilobytes as initial load. All right. The important thing is that you must have this initial budget. So we answered the last question. Now we look at how React actually know this is when they need to fetch the code, and the other is that how React know how to store this and where it does store it. Well, the thing here is it rely on something called service worker. So model bundlers like Webpack, Vite, Parcel, so they generate is a manifest. Of course, you can tell to those parsers to generate, or these model bundlers to generate this manifest. That'll be the input for uh, the service workers as a way to understand that. Which the service worker, after all, is just a browser feature that sits between your API or your app request and the API. So this is helpful for providing net or providing offline capabilities as well as push notification, because you can tell the service worker, hey, this is the resource I would like to catch here. So if you don't have a new, fresh, updated version of it, please make the request. If you already have it, okay, let's gonna use our catch version. So that's something interesting, because this is not only change the way of how we are going to build our applications, in the sense, or how we architecture our applications. That's also the way of how, for example, we can choose to go with frameworks like Next or Remix. You can do that by yourself, all right? And if you want us to learn more about Service Worker, which is something that go beyond the scope of this video, those Service Workers courses are there, which is something that I would like to take after that here, for so, like so, PW Service Worker here, from Kyle Simpson, and then as well as from Maximiliano Ferdman here, which is great. Oh, you can take a look at him, independent consultant, like him. Yeah, exactly. He teach mobile, Android and iOS, HTML5, PWA, and web performance trainings. He has been working in the web since 1996. Holy moly. And in the mobile app space since 2001. Ah, God. Oh my God. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, okay. And the other is this. Yeah, but again, he holds several courses from that. So yeah, after all, this is not the intent of today's video. It's just as a way to look at another um, someone here that can actually, or another instructor here from these courses. Okay. So I would like to later on take the course of I think it's JavaScript in the background, especially on the service worker here. as a way to understand is that service worker background APIs. This is something especially good and interesting if you're going to go with the if you're going to use Next.js, which a lot of companies out there are relying on React. So okay, cool. So we were describing is more about the code splitting advanced techniques, okay? And as you move on to another technique, which is the server-side rendering, and what is the end goal of this? Well, code splitting focuses on reduce the initial bundle to load. The server-side rendering is focused on how to reduce the initial render time or paint time. So how can we make this initial render fast as possible? And here, in the context of our applications and the way how we are now building our applications, okay? So we got is, as a way of how we are building our applications. So back in the old days, anytime we click on a link, we have to do something called round trip. We have to wait for that request fly away, and then the server detects that, renders the HTML document, and then send us back to the browser so we can render properly, and we can see, hey, a baby dancing. Okay. So, but now things are getting more and more demanding, which means that users now say, I want to make things fast. I want this to be fast. So on the industry, they come up with some ideas, especially of how you can now try to improve the user experience as much as possible. And that is when you have something called client-side rendering. So this client-side rendering, okay, it will allow us to now load all the necessary code that the browser needs to, and then we can is let the user, as they navigate through our app, okay, only fetch the necessary data for that, only fetch small chunk of data, Ajax request. So our user now, or the user experience, improve the feeling of perceiving speed as they're clicking different applications, so they don't have to wait for that to be low. So now they can get that data from that. When you are navigating to an e-commerce applications, that's exactly what you can see. Let's say you want to look for some shirts to your dog, okay? Or you want to look for a piece of your motorcycle. You say, hey, I need a new brake. That's dangerous if you don't have one. But I need a new brake, okay? So I look up for a brake on the search bar. Now the e-commerce show me a results blazing fast. I can look at which one of the most that fits to my motorcycle in terms of price, and most likely price, okay, and design. And then I click on that, it will show up the product detail. So now I can see what's going on and how can I do that, which means that what is the review of this, the specs, so on and so forth, until I decide, hey, you know what? Yeah, this is what I need to. How much it costs? give me twice. So the idea here is that once you know this, once you reach to this point, to the product detail, and then you do the checkout to actually pay for that, all of this process, now you don't have to wait for the entire application to load. You get that blazing fast. So that's the idea of this client-side rendering, which is great. So you have now this. So the other is that what will happen, for example, if you already know the URL of your product detail, okay, you don't decide to purchase that now or buy that now. You're gonna do that later. So how can you do that? Okay, or how can you serve the content to the client? That's when we have now the server-side rendering. So with that huge little bit of history, we have now the client-side rendering. This is when the user now navigates through our app. Inside of that, so once the user fetch all of the resources, once the user navigate to our app, and then once the user look out for our app and then navigate through that, this is known as the client-side rendering. But for example, if the user knows, hey, this is something this is something that now I want to look at that. So for example, the product detail, hey, this is something that I want to look at that. All right, so now you're going to show that. And this is called the server-side rendering. So it's the server that actually needs to create that. In the context of React, we need to define these two files. One of them that'll be used by React to load every asset or resource that the browser only can load, and this is when you define all of your analytics, that kind of thing. Okay, this is when you hydrate your applications. And the other is a server-side rendering. This is when you now going to stream that data and render chunks of that as soon as they are available. So once you do this process, now it is time to let your dev server or your model bundler, in our case Vite, hey, I want you to now take a look at this, okay? Generate is the necessary files, which is the client and the server code, okay? And then I'm going to, with those files, create the server that'll now take the index.html, populate with the content that I'm receiving from React as a stream, okay? And then serve that to the client. There's a lot of machinery stuff going on, but it's not that hard. It's not that hard. In fact, this is something that we got here. It's not that hard, by the way. It's not that hard. So, after we know how can we do that, or I know how can I do that, and this is something that, for example, frameworks like Next allow you to do that out of the box. So, which is something that you really need to. It actually provides a lot of value by making this entire mechanism pipeline simple as possible. Okay, there's some trade-off, of course, like on any solution. There's some trade-off, but yeah. Then we also look at exactly how can you do that, how you can now server code on the server side fetching. which is that particular route or that particular resource product detail that you want to get in. If that resource actually have some Ajax request, which is asking data, uh, it's asking for data, you can now is enable that by waiting for the content to be low and then render that. This can be useful, for example, your initial your landing page or your initial page. Okay, if you're an e-commerce, that makes a lot of sense to do that. But if you overuse that for any page, that's a pretty bad idea. That's a pretty bad idea. So why you would like to use this? So for example, let's say you actually are sending a request to a server in the Mars. It takes time. So because of this long distance, you want this particular content to be low as it is, with all the dynamic data to the server. Or again, if you're working for an e-commerce applications, that'll makes a lot of sense. Or any other application that needs to load those assets as soon as possible. That's great. Then I also look at this low priority re-rendering. In React, there is a concept called high priority and low priority, which means that when something goes wrong, I'm going to drop this rendering. So the idea behind this is that remember, this is just for solving Facebook problems when a second costs millions of dollars. Okay, if you have that kind of problem, please send me a check. I will gladly to assist. Totally. And then we have these two particularly hooks, right? You have the use defer value and the use transition. If you want to load something heavier, use transition is the way of how you can notify React to do that. Okay, hey, we're going to hey, we're going to load something that is heavier. Let me get ready for it. Okay, and that is, well, defining is a set of computation that you're going to do, or for example, some API requests that you want to do. The other is that or when you want to change from one page to another. Okay, when you have to render a lot of components out of this. The other is that use defer value. It's like, hey, React, we're about to load something heavier, so get ready. And then we look at Typescript. The thing with Typescript here is that it allows you to define is the intent of the code. And the value proposition of using Typescript here as a developer in VS Code or any text editor is to say, hey, you know what? We are going to, or this is something helpful because this is live coding documentations about the intent you had when you wrote this code, or when someone else had when you wrote this code. And that's something powerful. Because with that, we can take a look at the code. So actually the code is self-documented. It can also be quite annoying as well, especially if you're new to Typescript. It's like, what in the F is all of this about? But here, the first things first is how we can set up Typescript. So what is the anatomy of Typescript? We have the compilers, as well as something called the types. Okay, so in our compiler, we initialize our compilers configurations when we say, hey, we would like you to, the output that you're going to return is from this ECMAScript specification, which is this. I would like you to also recognize is this flavor of JavaScript, right? This JSX, as well as the type of model that we're going to use. This this model way of doing models, as well as a strict. If you are, for example, adding TypeScript to a new project, you might like to use this or to set this to false. Okay, and then the proper types, which there is a huge project called type definition, which is providing all of the type from all of these libraries. And here there is no intersection. React and React Down actually have types for that. Okay, and then we started to migrate or see how can we migrate our JSX to TSX. Okay, so first thing first, start with leave React component. That makes more sense when you do that. For example, your models, that's a good start. And it's important to notify your linter about what is the plugins that we need to add, and also the TypeScript linting code that we want that this help us here. So ESLint, this is when we say, hey, we're going to install is the plugin from TypeScript. I also would like to install is the import resolvers. So the first will give us the ability to import TypeScript files. So ESLint will recognize that. The second, the TypeScript is that give us the ability to lint TypeScript code. Okay, and then the parser, which is this logic that we need to communicate to ESLint to understand our TypeScript code. And that's exactly what we did. There are some usually there are some two npm script called format and lint that it will give what I will most of the time. This is something that we use on our CI/CD pipelines. Okay, where you got is prettier, and this is what it's going to tell us. So hey, I want you to provide me the format, and I want you to now link the code. If everything went well, good. If not, well, what went wrong? So once you do that, and then now Mercury is in retrograde with Aquarius, and it's aligned with Jupiter. Now TypeScript is happy about it. I'm joking, of course. So this is how this ESLint JSON files should look like. Pretty straightforward. Here we say, hey, this is how we indicate what will be is the recommended code styles, as well as how you want to resolve things like importing files, React, as well as the accessibility features as well. So you have also here React hooks as a way to help us to correct that. In TypeScript, we also now add those TypeScript rules here. We'll notify that this is the plugin that we want to use to ESLint. The parser, which is this logic that we need to tell to ESLint to understand TypeScript code. Where is the TypeScript configuration file, as well as some of the features from TypeScript, like the ESLint parser, Okay, so what are the files that I want you that I this is telling to ESLint, hey, this is the file that I want you to lint. And here is to resolve is the import. All right. The next step was to so after we know what Typescript is, what's the value proposition of Typescript, as well as yeah, what is the Typescript value, or the value proposition of Typescript here on React, and then how can we configure Typescript with our ESLint. When can we start to adding all of these different features, when we can start to work with Typescript file from our Leaf React components, and then what is the other steps? We can start with our API response, okay? And this is something that you might want to do that. Okay, this might be a good approach to grab those files and start to do the Typescript here. So Typescript won't help you. Typescript will help you is with JavaScript problems, not with API problems. So for that you can use things like TRCP, which this is the way of how you can make sure that the API responds with something valid. Okay. Or you can create a new file, which turns out to be way much more easy to do that by. So here we are with our enum type, which is a bag of constant, right? We define of this, then our interface like so, as well as this. Okay, and that's great. As we move on here, so first with our API response, and then with the context, and as we move, and as we're starting to migrate our context, there's some wisdom gems here that Brian Holt dropped. What the problem with the migration of Typescript is because sometimes you don't know if the Typescript is telling you that this is an actual type error, or if Typescript is being finicky about it. So this is when you're starting to realize that Typescript migration from 10 to 60% is misery. Get used to that. And not only that, the less you file, or the more you do this, the less you file with the compiler. So like anything in life, exposure and practice makes the master. So those gems that it dropped here was very, very interesting. Yeah, totally. Because with that, he mentioned, it's like, hey, well, actually, Typescript broke me, so I perhaps should dedicate my life to be a bartender. Yeah, it is way, way much more easy to do that. This is just something that Brian Hall described. Okay. So after we make that migration from the context, okay, in any time you transform your GSS file to TSX files, then is when you're going through line by line of solving those Typescript problems. So in the case of the context, we need to provide is the shape by default. So the reason to do this is for testing, which is a very limited use case, but something that you will see in large code bases. So quick note here, you need to forward the Typescript compiler sometimes to actually run the VS Code. So by adding the file and the line code again, okay, part of the devil is on the detail. So we talk about is the migrating your leave React components and then the API response or your API request, uh, with some gems here, especially as you're starting to do this migration, in how at the beginning of or from 10 to 60% is doing this migration is misery. It's because you don't know if the TypeScript is telling you that this is a type error or if the TypeScript is being finicky about it. That being said, the more you do this, the less you fight a TypeScript compiler. So after we do this migration, we look at now our context, and how in the context we define is the default value, and the reason for doing this is for testing, which is a very limited use case, but something that you will see in large code bases, which is great. Okay. As well as here, typing DOM elements components. So now that we look at the API response, and then how can we migrate the context? And now of the DOM elements. Again, remember that TypeScript here can become quite finicky of doing this migration. If you're going with the class, you're gonna see that a lot on those code bases. Okay. And the other is that as you do this, the idea of checking all of these types is by being defensive with your code in the DOM element, as well as the props and error boundaries. And here, this is something that you can find, which is to me is that is a irrelevant case for that. In the case of which interface we should use, whether it is the React.fc or the React functional components. I mentioned that because this is something that you can find that on the discussion, the React discussion. Okay. Then we look at the type components with React query. And here, depending on how your project is set up, you're likely to define types either in async functions, so you can easily test those scenarios. So for example, if you're using React query, which is this data library for fetching, sync, catching, and update server, or with the server, okay, this React query, especially if you're going to use some custom hooks, it is important to abstract those custom hooks to be self-contained so you can test them properly. Okay. So, all right. So with that, all right, by looking at now the React query and then typing with forms, okay, especially when you are migrating your form, again, you can be here is when you define is your different states of that, whether you define inside of your hooks inside of the states, or some finicky things that can TypeScript allow you to do that. The thing here is that after we made this migrate, so by understand what TypeScript is, the value proposition of TypeScript, and then you say, okay, now how can I configure TypeScript in my code using also ESLint? Where can I start? By your leaf or React components, and then you can go to your API responses. There's some gems here with some gems like, okay, these migrations, TypeScript migration from 10 to 60% is is misery. Why? Because you don't know if the TypeScript compiler is actually telling you an error or if TypeScript is being finicky about it. So the more you do this, the less you fight with your TypeScript compiler. Then we also look at how you can, for example, go to context. How can you start change or migrate that the context? And how you must provide is a shape for testing, as well as the props and components and React components on your DOM elements, and how you have to become, or how you need to be very defensive in there, as well as how you can now is take a look at the React queries, about the shape of the React query that you need to return to that, and also is the typing components in a form. Depend on which library that you're using. Perhaps if you're using is React hook forms, you don't need to actually do that, because actually that was handled a lot of by that. Okay. So after that you can fully migrate your entire TypeScript or React code base to TypeScript. Okay. Now we define some other npm script. This is more for the CI/CD process. Okay. So after you successfully convert a file or a project to TypeScript, check for linting type checks like so. Okay. Check for linting and type check. Both commands run without printing something, or if both commands run without printing something, for example, the lint here, which is in the type check, we're good to go and add that to the package JSON. So all of these are useful things because we can define them as part of our CI/CD pipelines for code quality. Meaning, once you have your GitHub set up, or your GitHub Actions set up, later I can run this command for code quality, and we can also add the format check here, which is something that we did. But remember, the entire reason of doing this is that anytime you have this particular TypeScript code, you want to link your code, talk to ESLint to say, hey, is your code is clean? If it is, okay, hey TypeScript, is your code is good? It's good to go. There's no any errors there. All right, cool. So now your code is ready for production. And there is a lot of pipeline there to reach to this conclusion. And I love it. And I love it. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is just to take notes of Redux here, about how to do this. Some notes here about Redux, so how to do that. Particularly is the setup Redux toolkits. Let's set up Redux toolkit. Okay. Set up Redux toolkit. The other is creating a slice. Very, very important. Creating a slice. Perhaps for all code bases, you are going to see things like that. Yep. What? Okay. And yep, then wiring Redux to component, then wiring Redux to component.
So now we have it all set up to track our adopted.
Okay. And then we have adding search patterns to Redux. So adding search patterns to Redux, that kind of thing. As well as this. Search pattern to Redux. Redux toolkit query and middleware. Okay. Redux toolkit and middleware. Yeah, and middleware. All of these are just topics of that course. And you got Redux dev tools. Okay. Then we got Redux dev tools. Fantastic. So okay. So today we're gonna take a look is at the setup, creating slides, and wiring a Redux 2 component. Can you? Okay. You got it. Okay. You're not going to see what I'm gonna do because actually I'm looking another window for that because I already received a flag from the Froggen Master to say, hey, you can learn from this, but you can record yourself while learning and looking at the same and looking at their videos at the same time. So okay, that's good, no problem.
We just finished Typescript, and we are going to talk about Redux now. So I've taught Redux as part of the complete intro to React for now years, right? I like Redux. I used to use Redux quite a lot. And then there was like a long period of time when React, like core React kind of caught up to not really needing Redux anymore, that I kind of felt let it fall by the wayside. In fact, the past couple courses I've taught Redux, I kind of preface it always with, I'm going to teach you Redux so that I hope that you don't use Redux later, right? Because most people kind of have like this association with React and Redux kind of in the same, line of thought. I'm going to say this has changed relatively recently. They released something called Redux Toolkit, and they took what was hard about Redux and they made it very easy. So I'm kind of coming back around to from never use Redux to maybe sometimes, in specific cases, Redux Toolkit can solve some really cool problems for you. So why do we have Redux? Maybe let's start with what is Redux. Redux is a central store for your data.
Mm-hmm.
So if you remember from the complete intro, we talked about context, right? We used to not have context in React. It used to not be a thing at all. And so having a centralized store for like app level data, you needed some third-party library to do that. We had Flux before, and then we ended up with Redux, which is kind of like the pinnacle of the Flux architecture. But we ended up also with like MobX and Zeitstand and some other, I don't even know how to say that, but there's that library that I can't pronounce. And there's a couple other ones. I still think at the core of it, Redux is probably the most popular one. But yeah, there are some other options there as well. Then we got context. We didn't really need a centralized store anymore because we had this ability to share context across a Redux app, across a React app. And so Redux ended up being kind of superfluous at that point. So I'm coming back around that with Redux Toolkit, which is this basically it's a framework around Redux that Redux can now be useful again. So why do we use Redux? Redux Toolkit, which is this basically it's a framework around Redux that Redux can now be useful again. So why do we use Redux? Context used to be a lot worse, but now it's better. But the nice thing about Redux code is it's extremely testable. That's the point of Redux, is they basically take all of your state change, right, going from state A to state B, and they make all of those transition states testable. 95% of your bugs and UIs is just going to be state management gone awry, right? So if you can make stateful transitions testable, you're going to eliminate entire classes of bugs that your app is going to have.
If you can eliminate
Management gone awry,
if
right?
you can eliminate
So if you can make
if you can make stateful transitions testable, if you can make stateful transition testable,
transitions testable, you're going to eliminate entire classes of bugs that your app is going to have. That seems pretty useful to me, right? So it's testable and it's debuggable, which, you know, two of my favorite things if you've been listening to me long enough.
yeah, testable and debuggable.
I always harp on, is this readable? Is this testable?
Is this readable? Is this testable? Is this debuggable?
And is this debuggable? So that's where we are with Redux. It used to be really verbose to set up, and Redux Toolkit has now made that not very verbose. So if you want to learn raw Redux without Redux Toolkit, take version 7 of this course, right? It'll be version 4 of Intermediate React. That has a whole section on Redux. It goes through with raw Redux, but today we're going to go through with Redux Toolkit, which I think is going to be a more pleasant experience for you. So Redux, it's just, they kind of pull apart all the various different parts of changing state, and it made it hard to write, but now we're going to use Redux Toolkit, which is going to make that a lot easier. So start with a fresh copy of the application. So if you've been doing like the TypeScript stuff, put that aside, and we're going to start again from a fresh copy of 14-context from the repo. And then we're going to say npm install @redux.js/toolkit.
Okay. But it's important. At least what really care about is Brian introduced Redux and the Redux toolkit. Redux removes state management from React and moves to a separate store, which makes the code easy to test and the code that use context. So Brian hold. So Brian introduced Redux and Redux DevTool, the Redux toolkit. Okay. So Brian introduced Redux and Redux toolkit. Okay. So Redux remove state management from React. Okay. So Redux remove state management from React, which is good. Okay. It move into its own store. Okay. And move it to a separate store. Okay. And move it into a separate store. Something that I'm quite familiar with, especially because I work with Vue architectures and I'm quite familiar of what they're doing, how things going on, by the way. Okay. And it moved to a separate store here. Yep. It move into a separate store, which makes the code easy to test. Okay, so which makes the code or the UI code, which makes the UI code easier to test and debug. 3 of my favorite things here. Is this readable? Is this testable? Is it debuggable? So he talked about
we just finished TypeScript, and we are going to talk about Redux now.
Okay. So we have just finished TypeScript, and we are going. Yeah, we just
finished TypeScript.
we just finished. I'm sorry. we just finished Typescript.
Script, and we are going to talk about Redux.
Exactly. So we just finished Typescript, and we are going to talk about Redux.
Now, so I've taught Redux as part of the complete intro to React for now years, right? I like Redux.
Okay. So Brian Holt. Yeah, Brian Holt has taught Redux for years.
I used to use Redux quite a lot, and then there was like a long period of time when React, like core React, kind of caught up to not really needing Redux anymore.
Okay. And now there is a time when we don't need to use Redux anymore, since they incorporate in or integrate this in the React core.
That I kind of felt let it fall by the wayside. In fact, the past couple courses kind of caught up to not really needing Redux anymore. That I kind of felt let it fall by the wayside.
That I kind of let it fall.
Side.
That I kind of let it fall by the side. Why? What? That I kind of let it fall by the side.
In fact, the past.
Okay, that I kind of let it fall. Okay. That he kind of let it fall.
Last couple core React kind of caught up to.
Okay. So Brian Holt has taught Redux for years, and now there's a time when React caught us to not need to use Redux anymore, since they integrate that in the React core. So that he kind of let it fall.
Not really needing Redux anymore. That I kind of felt let it fall by the wayside.
Yeah, that he kind of let it fall by the sidewalk. That he kind of let it fall by the sidewalk.
Aside. In fact, the past couple courses I've taught Redux, I kind of preface it always with, I'm going to teach you Redux so that I hope that you don't use Redux later.
So the preface here with Redux is that the preface from Brian with Redux is he's going to teach me how to use Redux, so I don't need to use it, since now that is built in the React core.
Right? Because most people kind of have like this association with React and Redux kind of in the same, line of thought. I'm going to say this has changed relatively recently. They released something called Redux Toolkit, and they took what was hard about Redux and they made it very easy.
Okay, so Redux Toolkit is, or the Redux Toolkit aims to take the hard part of Redux and make it easy.
So I'm kind of coming back around to from never use Redux to maybe sometimes, in specific cases, Redux Toolkit can solve some really cool problems for you.
Okay. So maybe in some cases, Redux Toolkit can solve you. Maybe in some cases, Redux Toolkit can solve you. Can solve you really cool problems.
So, why do we have Redux? Maybe let's start with what is Redux. Redux is a central store for your data.
Exactly. So Redux is a central store of your data. Okay? So
if you remember from the complete intro, we talked about context, right? We used to not have context in React. It used to not be a thing at all. And
exactly. So we used not to have context. So that's not.
your data. So if you remember from the complete intro, we talked about context, right? We used to not have context in React. It used to not be a thing at all. And so having a centralized store.
Exactly. We used not to have a context at all. So having a centralized store
for like app level data, you needed some third-party library to do that. We had Flux.
Exactly. So to do state management
used to not have context in React. It used to not be a thing at all. And so having a centralized store.
Exactly. So having a centralized store at the app level, exactly, or having a centralized store for, okay, having a centralized store for app level data, you have to go with third party libraries. Yeah, it makes sense, but again, the idea here is to, well, gain a lot of these soft skills that the reason of solving this kind of problems, okay, or now being more articulated, especially when you need to describe what are the things that you're going to do, or what are the things that you are doing here, which is something important, especially as a software engineer. It's important to man or woman or whatever gender you want to identify. Keep up the pace, understand, improve your communication skills, as well as your analytic, technical coding. So yeah, we don't have, and that's exactly what we have before. Because Redux is a central store of your data. So we used not to have context at all, if you remember for previous courses. So having a centralized store for app level data, for app level data, you have to go with third parties libraries. That's what happened. You have to go with third party libraries. So Redux, for example, and this is also, for example, in the case of Vue, that say, okay, makes sense of doing that.
But there's that library that I can't pronounce, and there's a couple other ones.
but Redux mobs, for example. But again, the idea here of the Redux, okay, is that it removes the state management from React to move it into a separate store, which makes the UI code easier to test and debug. So that's right. So we have just finished Typescript, and we're going to talk about is Redux. So Brian Hall has taught Redux. Okay, Brian Hall. This is from his perspective. So Brian Hall has taught Redux for years, and now there's a time when React called us to not need to use Redux anymore. And this is something because it's when he mentioned chorus, he mentioned something like yeah, when he mentioned something like chorus, okay, he mentioned or he described yeah, when he mentioned that chorus, when React chorus, we don't when React chorus do not need to use Redux anymore since they integrate that in the core React. So he kind of felt he kind of let it fall by the sidewalk. Okay. And this is something interesting and important from all of this. So yeah, man. So from recent updates in React ecosystem, okay? So anytime React update itself, okay? He mentioned that React caught us so he mentioned that React caught us do not need to reuse Redux anymore since they integrate in the core. So the preface from Brian Redux of this little overview is to say, hey, I'm gonna teach you Redux so you don't need to use it. Okay? And Redux toolkits, which is now the thing here called Redux toolkit. Okay? So Redux toolkits take us the hard part of Redux and make it easy for us, because something we have previously is Redux. Okay, that after all, what is Redux? Makes sense. So Redux is a central store of your data. So we used not to have context at all, and context at the beginning was terrible to use. So having a centralized store, or having a centralized store for app level data, you have to go with third-party libraries such as Redux and Mops. And in the case for Vue, you have to go with things like Vuex.
I still think at the core of it, Redux is probably the most popular one.
So I still think that the core of Redux is still the popular one, the way of how you can now do that.
But yeah, there are some other options there as well. Then we got context. We didn't really need a centralized store anymore because we had this ability to share context across a Redux app, across a React app. And so Redux ended up being kind of superfluous at that point. So I'm coming back around that with Redux Toolkit, which is this basically.
Exactly. So then context came out, making Redux. That's exactly, for example, if you look at other projects like that. So when they say, hey, I don't need to use Redux for that, let's going to use context for that. So then context came out, making Redux superfluous.
It's a framework around Redux that
But here we are going to see Redux toolkit, which is a framework that takes the hard parts of Redux and make it easier.
Redux can now be useful again. So, why do we use Redux? Context used to be a lot worse, but now it's better. But the nice thing about Redux code is
Exactly. It's like, why do we use Redux? Okay, because this is what is Redux. So what is Redux? And I think this is something important, especially as you provide context. You know. So what is Redux? What is this? Yeah, as you provide context, this is something important and useful for that. So why do we use Redux? Context was not used to be a thing. Then it came out.
now be useful again. So, why do we use Redux? Context used to be a lot worse, but now
Exactly. So context was not to be used a thing. Then it came out and was to be a lot of worse. And then now it's better. And now it is better. Exactly.
it's better. But the nice thing about Redux code is it's extremely testable.
But the nice thing about Redux is that it's extremely testable. Because the problem it's solved. Most React apps, 95% of the time, is about UI bugs. Okay. So most React app of the 95% of the time is about UI bugs. UI bugs.
That's the point of Redux, is they basically take all of your state change, right, going from state A to state B, and they make all of those transition states testable. 95% of your bugs and UIs is just going to be state management gone awry.
Okay. So but the nice thing about Redux is that it is extremely testable because the problem is solved because most React app or 95% of that. Okay, because 95% of UI bugs is because some state it's just a state management going wild. It's just a state management go wild. Going awry. Gone wild. So it can test one stage change from A to B.
Right? So if you can make stateful transitions testable.
So if you can make stateful transition testable, okay, which is this, you are solving 95% of those UI bugs.
You're going to eliminate entire classes of bugs that your app is going to have.
Or you are going to eliminate classes. You're going to eliminate entire classes. Exactly. You're going to eliminate entire classes of bugs that your app might have or is going to have, that your app is going to have. But it
seems pretty useful to me, right? So it's testable and it's debuggable, which, two of my favorite things if you've been listening to me long enough. I always harp on, is this readable, is this testable,
is debuggable.
and is this debuggable?
So, a good note. Anytime you look at code, ask yourself, is this readable, testable, and debuggable?
So that's where we are with Redux. It used to be really verbose to set up, and Redux Toolkit has now made that not very verbose.
Okay. So Redux used to be verbose. Redux Toolkit is more succinct.
So, if you want to learn raw Redux without Redux Toolkit, take version 7 of this course. Right? It'll be version 4 of Intermediate React. That has a whole section on Redux. It goes through with raw Redux, but today we're going to go through with Redux Toolkit, which I think is going to be a more pleasant experience for you. So Redux, it's just they kind of pull apart all the various different parts of changing state, and it made it hard to write, but now we're going to use Redux Toolkit, which is going to make it a lot easier. So start with a fresh copy of the application. So if you've been doing like the Typescript stuff, put that aside, and we're going to start again from a fresh copy of 14-context from the repo. And then we're going to say npm install @redux.js/toolkit, and we're going to do @version 1.8.6. And then we're going to use a library that glues React and Redux together called React Redux at 8.0.4. So that is to say, you can use Redux outside of React. Redux works with Angular.
You can use Redux outside of React. Redux GX Toolkit.
And I imagine it works 0.0.4. So that is to say, you can use Redux outside of React. Redux works with Angular, and I imagine it works with lots of other frameworks as well. But we are going to be obviously using it with React. Okay. So now that we have that, we're going to go into our source directory. We're going to create a file called store.js. This is basically where we're going to instantiate our Redux store. We're going to import configure store from @Redux Toolkit. We're going to const store equals, let's get rid of that, configure store, and we're going to give it like a reducer object here, and for right now it's going to be empty, but eventually we're going to start giving stuff to it. And then we're going to export default store. This, if you've ever done Redux before, this should look pretty familiar to you. It's relatively similar. We're then going to migrate our existing pet adoption application to store some of its data in Redux, not all of it. And when you use Redux with React, it's not like you don't use state anymore, but all of the use state calls that you're going to use in React at that point are going to be very much like show this modal, hide this modal, is active, is not active. It's going to be very UI state kind of sort of state, as opposed to you're going to put everything into Redux is going to be like the user, the pets, like the location that they're in, those kind of things, like those kind of like app level states.
App level states, exactly.
Okay. So in app.jsx, you can delete the adopted pet context. We'll get rid of that. And you can delete the use state here from React, so you can get rid of that. Okay.
Exactly.
And then at the top here, we're going to have to import
or store
provider from React Redux.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also going to have to import the store from /store. Okay. You can drop this use state call here inside of app. And you can basically replace this adopted pet context with the provider. With store equals store, like that. And again, so I just replaced the adopted pet provider with just the provider from React
from
Redux.
our store, which is React Redux.
So this is going to stick our store.
What to do now is provide or give is data to. You're going to provide app level data to our app. You're going to provide app level data. Interesting.
Or on the context for React, which means now anywhere inside of our React application, we can access this Redux store. There's nothing in it yet, but we'll get there.
Completely. But that to me was very, very interesting. And for that, that'll be all for this video. And take care. Bye-bye.